Thor and Loki, two of the most well-known gods and probably favorite characters in Norse mythology. Who doesn't like a fierce, hammer-wielding god of thunder, especially when it's Chris Hemsworth? And the other, who has a tricky sense of humor we all enjoy. So, join me as I share with you one of the most famous stories of Thor and Loki's journey to the castle of the giant Útgarða-Loki in Jotunheim. It all began when Thor and Loki decided to travel to Útgarð, the land of the giants who were also enemies of the gods. And as they traveled far from Asgard in Thor's goat-drawn chariot, night fell and they had to stop for shelter. That's when a farmer and his family, a boy named Tjalfi and a daughter named Röskva, welcomed them to their home. In gratitude for their hospitality, Thor offered his goats for supper that night, knowing that he could bring them back to life afterwards and not be at any loss. So the goats were cooked, and right before the meal, Thor laid down the goat's hide on the floor and instructed his hosts to place the bones on the hides after the meat had been eaten from them. But despite Thor's instructions, that night Loki decided to play one of his pranks and went to the youngest member of the family, Tjalfi. He provoked the boy into wanting to eat the delicious bone marrow, and hungry as he was, Tjalfi couldn't resist cracking open one of the bones and sucking out the marrow before he sneakily placed it back on the hide again. When Thor awoke the following morning, he took his hammer Mjolnir and raised it, blessing the goat hides, whereupon the goats sprang back to life. One of them, however, now had a lame hind leg. Thor immediately fell into fury as he intuited the reason behind this. The family had not treated the bones with proper care. In his rage, Thor would have slain all of them on the spot, had the farmer not begged for mercy, offering a payment for the wrong that had been done. His children, Tjalfi and Röskva, to be Thor's servants. Thor accepted the settlement, and he, Loki, Tjalfi, and Röskva pressed forward on foot towards Jotunheim, the land of the giants, leaving the goats behind. Upon reaching the ocean that separated Midgard from Útgarð, Thor found a boat, which they used to cross to the other side. From there they continued on foot through thick, tangled forests, and as it neared evening again, Tjalfi, the fastest of the runners, advanced forward, searching for lodgings, but none could be found. However, eventually, they all come upon a huge cave. Since there was no one inside, they decided to spend the night there. Around midnight, the travelers were jostled awake by an earthquake, and by groaning and rumbling noises from outside, they withdrew further into the cave, finding it split into a large room off to one side and 4 smaller rooms continuing straight ahead. Thor stood guard at the entrance of the largest of the 5 rooms, while the others spent the night at the far end of the room in fear. The next morning, when Thor stepped out, he found a sleeping giant outside. It had been the giant's snores that had caused the earth to rumble and shake. Thor, who hated giants, clutched his hammer to smite this foe of his. But the giant awoke at the last second and seemed to be amused by the sight of Thor and his companions. He introduced himself, Skirmir, and that he already knew full well to whom Thor was. Skirmir then picked up his glove, which had actually been the great cave in which Thor and the others had taken shelter, and proposed that he accompany them on their journey. To this Thor agreed, and they all went off through the forests and over the hills. They had their breakfast, and Skirmir offered to carry the provisions in his bag. After traveling the entire day, they all took shelter beneath a venerable oak, and Skirmir fell asleep. But during the night, Thor felt hungry, but as much as he tried, he couldn't untie the knot on Skirmir's bag. Angered, Thor struck the sleeping Skirmir on the forehead with his Mjolnir, hoping to take his life. But the giant awoke calmly and asked if a leaf had fallen on his head. Thor was baffled. This was the first time his hammer had failed him. Nonetheless, Skirmir then opened the bag, and Thor and the others were able to eat food that night and went to sleep. But as the night progressed, the giant's snores grew loud, that they echoed through the valleys like thunder. Unable to sleep, Thor fell into a fit of rage, wanting to take Skirmir's life, and tried a second time to smite him on the head. But, much as before, Skirmir awoke and asked if an acorn had fallen on his head. Thor was shocked and vowed to himself that the next time he'd use Mjolnir with enough force to send the giant to the depths of Niflheim. And just before dawn, Thor tried one more time to finish off Skirmir. But the giant awoke again and asked if some birds had roosted above him. That morning, the five continued on their journey when Skirmir told them that they were near the stronghold of the giant king, Útgarða-Loki, to the east. However, he planned to continue north, so they would be parting there. Before leaving, he advised them, "Keep your pride for your own kind, and keep your mouths shut. Útgarða-Loki's men won't stand for bragging from babies like you. I'd advise you to turn around and go home." Thor seethed at the insult, but was unable to do anything, and as Skirmir departed north, Thor and his companions continued towards Útgarða-Loki's castle. Reaching there around midday, they found the gate was locked, and no one was there to open it. But Thor and the others found that they could fit through the very large spaces between the bars. Once inside, they found a hall where giants of all ages lounged on two benches eating and drinking. Amongst them was the king of the castle, the giant Útgarða-Loki, who immediately recognized his new guests and began taunting them for their size. "Am I mistaken in thinking that this little fellow is Thor the charioteer? Maybe you're stronger than you look. In what skill do you excel? We never allow anyone to stay unless he is a master of some craft or pastime." Wanting to salvage his dignity and that of his companions, Loki proudly asserted that no one else in this castle could eat food faster than he could. Útgarða-Loki challenged him to prove this boast by entering a contest with one of their men, whose name was Loki. Servants then brought out a trencher and loaded it with meat. Loki sat at one end and Loki at the other. At a signal from the king, they both began eating, meeting in the middle. While Loki had eaten all the meat, Loki had eaten the meat, the bones, and the trencher. Loki had clearly lost. Next, Tjalfi, who was an extremely swift runner, offered to race anyone in the castle. Útgarða-Loki led them out to a racetrack and appointed Hugi to compete with him. 3 times the giant Hugi ran against Tjalfi. 3 times Hugi beat Tjalfi by wide margins, and in the final race, Hugi was at the finish before Tjalfi reached the halfway mark. Hugi was declared the winner. And at last, Thor then challenged anyone in the castle to a drinking contest. Útgarða-Loki had one of his servants fetch a drinking horn. Placing it before Thor, he informed him that whoever could finish the horn in 1 drink was considered a great drinker. Whoever could do it in 2 was considered fair. But no one in his retinue was such a poor drinker as to be able to finish it in 3. Thor took 3 enormous swallows, each larger than the last. Each time, the level in the horn dropped, but never did the horn empty. Ignoring the taunts to take yet another try, Thor returned the horn to Útgarða-Loki. The giant king then said, "It's clear your might is not as great as we thought. Would you like to try your hand at another contest? Young giants perform the feat of lifting my cat off the ground. I wouldn't have suggested it unless I had seen that you're a much less impressive person than I thought." A cat jumped out from under the king's chair and planted itself on the floor. Thor put his arm around the cat's belly and lifted, but the cat simply arched its back, such that its 4 feet stayed on the floor. Thor failed to do even this. Útgarða-Loki continued on with his taunt, saying, "As I thought, Thor is short and small in comparison to the mighty men here in this hall." Enraged, Thor challenged, "Small as you say I am, just let someone come out and fight me. Now I'm angry." Insultingly, Útgarða-Loki looked around the hall. "I doubt anyone would wrestle you. They'd feel it's beneath them. Find Ellie, my old wet nurse. Thor can wrestle her if he likes." Thereupon, an old woman entered the hall and agreed to Thor's challenge. Thor threw himself at the woman, but she was stronger than she seemed. She stood firm and unshaken. Then she tried to hold her to on Thor, catching him off balance and forced him to one knee. The great god of thunder had lost even in this challenge. But Útgarða-Loki called out, "Enough. You've shown your true strength. There is no point in Thor challenging anyone else in the hall." Útgarða-Loki decided that there should be no more contests, and his guests should spend the night in the castle. Places were found for them, and food, drink, and bedding were arranged. In the morning, however, Thor and the others were the first to wake and immediately prepared to leave. And with every courtesy, invited them to breakfast before escorting them out of the castle. Thereupon, the giant king said to Thor, "Now that we're outside the walls, I'll tell you the truth. You'll never see the inside of these walls again. Had I known how strong you are, I'd never let you inside in the first place. You were nearly the end of us all. I have deceived you. It was I who met you in the forest. I used wires to fasten the pack so that you couldn't open it to get food. I placed a hill between my head and your hammer that you couldn't see. Those 3 square valleys you see behind the ridge were the marks you made in the earth with your hammer blows when you tried to hit me." Loki ate fast, but Loki was wildfire itself. He burned up the trencher and the meat. When Chalfie ran against Hugi, he ran against thought. Nothing can keep up with the speed of thought. And when you, Thor, drank from the horn, you thought you were found wanting, but the other end of that horn was connected to the sea. When you get back to the ocean, you'll see how much it has ebbed from your efforts. And the cat was not what it appeared. It was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. He raised it up from the seabed so high that its back grazed the sky. And it's a marvel that you withstood Ellie for so long. Ellie is old age. No one can withstand old age in the end. Here is where our ways part. It will be better if you never visit again. I have used tricks, and I'll use them again to protect Útgarð, so you'll never be able to harm us in any way." Hearing what Útgarða-Loki had to say, Thor was enraged by this humiliating trickery and snatched up Mjolnir to prepare to slay Útgarða-Loki and smash his castle to pieces. But when he turned to do so, he saw no giant and no castle. There was simply a wide and beautiful plain. There was nothing but the valleys and the ocean to indicate that any of this had ever taken place. Despairingly, the 4 traveled back to Midgard, where Thor retrieved his goats and his chariot and returned to Asgard. But this would not be the end of Thor's adventures with the giants. He vowed to seek another meeting with them, and with the serpent, Jormungandr. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to hear more mythological tales, comment down in the section below.